Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be talking about the best melee DPS spec in patch 8.2.5. We'll be looking at the patch 8.3 changes and how those might impact the melee DPS meta coming into high-end mythic rating, coming into high-end mythic plus content. So again, disclaimers, we're looking at top-end content. 8.3 patch changes are not finalized. There's a chance that certain specs might get buffs or nerfs. And overall, I'm not going to be looking at every single melee spec. I'll be looking at the most popular specs that could be deemed as the most optimal for both raid and mythic plus content. So first of all, let's have a look at melee DPS performance in raid scenarios. If you have been doing mythic raid content, you can see the chart here for 75 percentile in terms of all spec damage and their performance in Eternal Palace. You will know that there's one melee that you kinda have to have no matter what their performance is, no matter what they bring to the raid, and that is Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunter singular buff is one of the most powerful buffs you can bring, and that is 5% extra magic damage. And this buff is provided by Demon Hunters in general, but Vengeance is probably not the most popular tanking specs at this given time, so Havoc is always mandatory in your raid group, because a lot of the raiding content does prefer ranged, and you'll probably be stacking a lot of ranged. It really does depend. Eternal Palace is not too bad towards melee ranged comparisons, but overall Havoc is going to be brought in specifically for this raid buff. But the fun fact is that Havoc overall, the damage is actually quite insane. They're one of the best DPS specs both in raid environment and both in mythic plus. And on top of the great utility that they provide, on top of insane mobility, they also have decent raid cooldowns like Darkness, which to some extent is random. But overall, Havoc is probably in its best spot yet. And it's probably one of the most played DPS specs at this given time. And it makes sense. If you're overpowered, people will flock to that certain spec. And number 2 ranking here is going to go towards 2 DPS specs. And that is going to be a comeback kid, Fury Warrior, and Rogue, specifically Assassination and to some extent Outlaw. Now first of all, Fury has made a huge comeback with certain or recent class buffs that happened to Fury or Warriors in general. Fury has been included in some of the world first skills. They are doing some insane damage. They have very strong burst AoE capabilities. They have strong single target DPS. They have very good utility, and overall Fury has really cemented its place in that melee meta for Eternal Palace. And their popularity in Mythic Plus has also skyrocketed. So overall, Fury has really made a comeback in this patch, and we'll see how they do in the 8.3. And a lot of people will say that Fury Warrior single target rotation is not hard to execute. Get it? Doesn't matter. Now overall, Rogues are also in the second spot because again, they're one of the most popular melee specs. They have strong survivability. Assassination is probably the most preferred rogue spec in raid situations because of its superior single target DPS when you compare it to Outlaw. Keep in mind that both Assassination and Outlaw can provide good amounts of AoE, but they have different ways of providing that AoE. Outlaw's toolkit and the damage patterns are far more suited towards Mythic Plus or Mythic Plus pushing. So overall, there's a good example of this. Orgonzoa as a fight with Outlaw is actually preferred because it has a lot of AoE cleave capabilities to deal with AD damage, and Outlaw is the more popular spec. While for the majority of other fights, you will see Assassination as being the more popular spec because again, there is a lot of single target fights in Eternal Palace. If you're playing a rogue right now, you'll probably want to be able to play Assassination in raids or for single target fights, and Outlaw for pushing that Mythic Plus content. Rogues are in a very good position right now. Subtlety has fallen down and it's one of the least played specs in the game. It has lost all of its niche, and to some extent something needs to be done about Subtlety. But at the end of the day, if you're a rogue, you have 2 very viable specs at this given moment. Number 3 is also going to have 2 DPS specs, and I'm not 100% certain on this ranking yet. I could have gone either way, but a DK is going to be here and a Red Paladin. Now Red Paladin, even though if you look at the damage meters, you're probably not going to be overwhelmed or surprised to see Red Paladins not really dominating the DPS meters, but overall, there's strong single target and AoE potential on top of the utility that's provided through blessings has seen some Red Paladins being included in some of the world first skills. And there is a high representation for Red Paladins, even though their damage might, again, not be super impressive, their utility is still there. So keep in mind that I feel that red maybe should get certain buffs in the future, but they are situationally viable or very optimal depending on which bosses they're doing and if their blessings are gonna make an impact. On the other hand, Frost has seen some insane DPS gains. Frost is probably the preferable choice for DKs while doing raid content. And Unholy is probably the most popular spec for DKs if you're pushing Mythic Plus. Now keep in mind, Frost to some extent can be regarded as one of the best 2-minute cooldown burst class, especially if you can consider that you can pair up Breath of Sindragosa with Empowered Rune Weapon, making you an insane amount of DPS every 2 minutes. And depending on the fight length, you can really kind of cheese that and get some insane longs. Now keep in mind, this burst has seen a lot of Frost DKs being brought in Mythic Ashara, where you can kind of, take care of the odds yourself. So Frost really does have a spot, but at the same time, the representation for DKs in general is not really that amazing, and it's kind of rare to see a DK in World First raids. Now, this is the reason I said I wasn't completely sure about this ranking. I could have brought DKs or Frost a little bit higher, or I could have moved Red Paladins a little bit lower, but I feel the compromises here really kind of fit that third position. And lastly, now we're looking at the specs that are really underestimated or undervalued or underplayed. And that is Feral Druids, Enhancement Shamans, and Survival Hunters. And I'm also gonna include Windwalker Monks here. Now, first of all, like I mentioned, Feral, Enhancement, Survival. Survival is one of the least played specs in the game. They have very low representation. Even though the numbers might seem okay, there is a fraction of players that are playing these specs. A lot of the times, if you're playing a Survival Hunter, you might be forced to play, hey, why don't you play a BM Hunter? If you're playing Feral Druid, why don't you swap over to Balanced Druid? If you're playing Enhancement Shaman, Elemental is probably the better spec in the raid environment. So that basically leaves the hardcore players, the lovers of the spec, to kind of stick and play that Enhancement Shaman, to stick and play that Feral Druid. Their community perception is absolutely abysmal at this given time, while the performance isn't that bad. But you have to think about the ways to really create an optimal melee setup, and melee spots might be kind of hard to get into, and all of a sudden, playing that Feral Druid, playing the Enhancement Shaman, playing the Survival Hunter, your chances of getting into that melee team are kind of diminished. And I kind of hope that Blizzard is going to really look at these specs, because throughout whole BfA, they have not been part of any meta, Mythic Plus or raiding scenarios. So overall, these specs really need some love. And I mentioned Windwalkers here. Now, Windwalkers have a really high representation in terms of melee players. There's a lot of players playing Windwalker Monk, but their scaling has been abysmal since the start of the raid announcement. When Eternal Palace was released, Windwalkers were seeming really poorly in single target DPS. There is plenty of Windwalkers who probably re-rolled into some other melee spec because they saw that Windwalkers are not going to be competing with other melee DPS. If you want that 5% physical buff, you probably can get it with a Brewmaster Monk, because at the end of the day, Brewmaster is like topping charts, or is one of the best tanks in Mythic Plus and raid environments. So all of a sudden, even in Mythic Plus, Windwalker, the whole meme or the whole meta of we're gonna bring a Windwalker Monk just for that 5% physical buff has kind of disappeared, because a lot of the teams will bring in a Brewmaster instead, because they're one of the top tanks. And if I was talking about the top winners for Eternal Palace or the top losers for Eternal Palace, I have to mention that Fury Warriors are the climber spec. They've been performing really well. And the biggest loser, in my opinion, is gonna be Windwalker. From where they started in the previous tiers, they've really fallen down. Their scaling has not been great, and again, they need a buff. But I guess Blizzard knows about this, because they are issuing a buff to Windwalker Monks for patch 8.3, mainly to deal with their single target DPS. So we have to see how Windwalkers are going to perform in 8.3, because they really needed this buff. Let's look at Mythic Plus balance for melee DPS classes, and to be honest, the balance here is very different when you compare it to range DPS. For range DPS, there's actually quite a lot of chances for most of the DPS specs to be included in these Mythic Plus pushes, while for melee, there's 2 or 3 specs that are really dominant, and because they're so dominant, they can be stacked, and a lot of groups will stack them depending on what content you do. So first of all, we're looking at 15 and up keys, and you can see, again, Outlaw or Rogue in general is very popular. They are one of the most popular DPS specs in the game. You have to keep in mind that there is a difference between MDI type of meta and plus 24 world first key type of meta. where a lot of the times you won't see the same kind of meta appearing. For example, in MDI you might see triple Outlaw Rogue or double Outlaw Rogue and a Windwalker. But in plus 24 keys or specific type of world first content, you might see a complete different meta. So it does depend on what content you're trying to achieve. But in plus 15, Outlaw is dominating, and you have to keep in mind, Outlaw had a massive nerf happen a couple of months ago, a couple of patches before, aimed at their MDI performance. People were stacking double, triple Outlaw Rogue, and they got a massive nerf to do with their AoE capabilities, and they're still one of the most popular melee DPS, or actually DPS classes in Mythic Plus. A lot of people will say this thing, don't play the flavor of the month class or whatever. Rogue has been flavor of the expansion overall, so keep this in mind. Besides your Outlaw Rogue, you have Demon Hunter, and Demon Hunter again has been strong for the whole expansion. Demon Hunter, Havoc Demon Hunter, it just brings so many different things. Offensive Dispel, AoE stun, you have strong single target, strong AoE, you have decent amount of defensives, you have super mobility, and after that you will have the climber spec. So that is a Fury Warrior who is seeing more and more play in Mythic Plus. They're emerging. Keep in mind, it does take time for a new spec to emerge as good or part of the meta. You have Red Paladins who are doing pretty well in terms of plus 15 Mythic Plus content. Then you have Unholy Death Knights. Windwalker is still there. But if we go to plus 20 keys, you'll start seeing that the popular classes become popular and the fringe classes are almost gone. Again, Outlaw, the most preferred spec for really high Mythic Plus pushes, has been strong for the whole time. Havoc is gonna be there. It's probably gonna be your melee partner buddy in that Mythic Plus push. Again, Fury Warriors are kind of climbing up, and then you'll see probably Windwalkers, which are still very decent for Mythic Plus. Hey, we're gonna bring a Windwalker because of the 5% physical buff that monks provide. Let's just go with the Brewmaster. They're the top tank in Mythic Plus anyways. So Windwalkers are slowly disappearing. I guess I should mention Unholy Death Knights. I feel Unholy is underrepresented in this chart. In good or perfect scenarios where you're doing these massive pulls, you can pull 2 or 3 trash packs. Unholy DPS is actually insane. It's one of the best uncapped AoE DPS in the game right now, and Unholy single target was also buffed a couple of patches ago. So overall, Unholy can provide a good damage, but I guess they have not really picked up in that high-end plus 20, 21, 22, 23 pushes. But I feel they are undervalued to some extent. Mythic Plus meta arguably has not changed from the start of BfA. You only now start to see Fury Warriors climbing up, which are the new kids, the comeback kid. They're doing pretty well. A lot of certain other specs are kind of falling down in scalability, but you just can't. You can't compete with that Rogue who received a massive nerf and is still one of the most popular specs. You can't compete with that Havoc Demon Hunter who's been strong for the whole expansion. Again, flavor of the month or flavor of the expansion. Let me know how you feel about this video. Let me know how you feel about the melee DPS class that you're playing. What kind of changes do you hope patch 8.3 is going to bring? How do you think the new Mythic Plus affix is going to change different things? You have to consider the new affix. There is probably going to be a less of a need of Shroud of Concealment. So maybe Rogue popularity is going to diminish? Probably not. But we'll have to see. Let me know how you feel about this video. If you enjoyed this content, please do subscribe. It helps the channel to grow. It helps me to keep pushing these videos out. Let me know what next video you want to see. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in my next guide.